Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today I thought I'd show you a technique of using up all the leftover bits from your ends of your canes, all the distorted bits that you put on one side. And the answer what to do with them is this. This is a technique where you put all your bits together and you end up with a really nice veneer like this. And I will also show you how to put it together to create something like this at the end. I'm going to show you 3 different ways of doing this technique. 2 using the scrap ends like this, 1 using the extruder and 1 without. And then I will also show you how to get a similar technique for anyone who's brand new to polymer clay. So if you don't happen to have lots of leftover bits of scrap ends of canes or everything else, you can do exactly the same technique, just using brand new colours of clay, and I will show you how to do that too. So let's get started by showing you what equipment we need for today's project. The equipment you need for today's session is fairly straightforward. You need a polymer clay blade. I often refer to these as tissue blades because that's what I first got used to you calling them in the UK. Some form of small roller, a craft knife, one of these cable or knitting type needles. I use the cable ones because they're nice and short, but a knitting needle works just as well, or anything else. We're only going to use this just to push ends together of things, so any other tool you've got which is suitable. If you have one, then a polymer clay extruder is very handy. The one I'm using today is from the Makins range, but there are lots of other brands of extruders, and as long as they are meant to be used with polymer clay, just use whatever you have. And whichever one you've got, the disc we're looking for is this one, so it's the right angled triangle. So you can see there's a little right angle on this edge, and that's important because we're going to extrude it and then put 2 halves together to make a square, so you need the right angled one. If you've got something like this sort of graph paper or measuring sheet, if you've watched my videos you'll know this is the one I always use. It's from www.printablepaper.net and I've simply laminated it, but you really don't need it, just something to measure out lengths of the clay. So graph paper, lined paper or a ruler, whatever you've got, work absolutely fine. We will need a flat sheet of clay to create a veneer, so either use a pasta machine to get a flat sheet or simply roll a piece of scrap clay nice and flat. Having wet wipes or wet tissues to hand is handy, just to clean your hands if you need to. If you want to make something like the heart I showed you at the beginning of the tutorial, then you will need a stencil or a template. This is one I've been having a huge amount of fun with recently. So this is like this chunky heart shape. This is from PC UK Tools and this is stencil number 19, and I'll put the links to where to get hold of that in the details below the video. These are the little crystals you can buy online. I'm using those. They're the ones with like the pyramid backs, so the pointed backs, and they're quite handy. If you don't have any of these, then just have some of the flat stick-on ones, and you can always stick those on at the very end when you've finished everything. This is a jewellery drill with a small drill bit, and then some of the tiny hooks, and again I will put details of where to get these on the details below the video. And then other than that, if you're going to bake your piece, then obviously you need a tile to bake on and some tin foil, aluminium foil, just to tent the whole piece in when you bake it to make sure that it doesn't burn should your oven spike. So I think that's it for all the equipment, so let's move on to the clay you're going to need. So for the first 2 techniques we're going to do, the first 2 ways of doing it, we are going to use the distorted ends of canes. So these are the bits that you would normally cut off and discard because the pattern's become completely distorted. So I've just gone through my box of canes and just chopped off some of the ends. A nice variety of colours is quite good. One thing you do need to make sure is that they're all relatively new and or all at the same amount of softness, because what won't work so well is if you've got one bit that's really hard and one bit that's really soft. And then we'll also just need some form of scrap clay, so if you've got some to hand, just to put on the bottom when we create our veneer, so we have somewhere to put our patterned slices of clay. Right, so let's get on to the first technique. So technique number 1 is using all of these and doing that with an extruder. So when you've decided on your colour scheme, just get your end bits, and all we're going to do is we're going to push these into round canes. Don't worry about the distortion, that's all part of the fun that comes out in the pattern. And what we're looking to do, we're looking to get all these canes down to a nice round size. So I'll bring you back when I've got all of these done and we've got them all down to this sort of size. Okay, so there are our rolls of canes. Now 1 or 2 of them I actually swapped out because when I was rolling these they was really quite old and crumbly. In order to do this video I've swapped them over for ones that are rolling quite nicely. When you're putting things through the extruder you really want all the clay if possible to be about the same sort of amount of conditioning so that it moves through at the same extent. If you're doing it by hand it's not so important, so bear that in mind as well when you're doing this as a technique. So all we're going to do now is we are going to take slices of our pieces. Doesn't matter what size, they don't have to be regular. What I'm going to do is try and do even amounts so I can do some of each one in the hand technique and some in the extruder technique. Okay, and then all we're going to do is we are going to take randomly and put our patterns together. Now I'm saying randomly, I'm going to try and keep these the same in as much as I'm doing 2 sets here, one to do by hand and one to do through the extruder, just so you can see what's happening. You don't need an awful lot either in order to get through the extruder. That probably is about enough, so let's put those pieces to one side. So what we're going to do now, I'll do the extruder technique first. So we have our extruder here, so I'm going to undo the end of my extruder, sit the disc in, and then I'm going to extend the extruder as far as it will go so I can push the clay down the whole length. And all I need to do now is to get this clay small enough that it's going to fit through that aperture and of a size that I can fit the piece in. So I'm just going to roll this together. We're just going to get that bit in. Not quite going to get the end bit in, so let's just chop him off. And then screw on the end. Nice and tight. And then I will get a measuring sheet to hand, but what you then do is you simply extrude your clay. When you get to the end, simply chop off the end bit. So I'm then going to pull it straight on the measuring sheet and I'm going to cut it off in 2" or 5 centimetre lengths. Just cheated slightly and pulled it so that it makes it the right length. And then just simply pick up and put 2 pieces together to make a square. And do that all the way along the line, either putting your pairs together or picking random ones up, however you want to do it. Completely up to you. And do it until all your pieces are together in squares. And then start putting your pieces together. So you can either put them together so that the lines go across like that, so you're constantly going upwards and downwards, or completely randomly, whatever you wish to do. Because I'm missing a piece there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a single piece of cane back through the extruder to give me enough length, just to add an extra little piece in there. And now we can start Just pushing those pieces together, make sure they're all nicely adhered. Keep it in its nice square format. And then of course wherever you cut through, you are going to get a mirror image. And there you have a fun effect with leftover scraps of clay. Now you can just make things just taking off 2 slices, mirroring them each time, or you'll be surprised at how many slices of these you can go down and end up with quite a nice broad sheet. So I will do that in a minute, but first let's go back to that pile of clay we had and do the technique without the extruder. So here's exactly the same roll as we had, which we put through the extruder, but this time we're just going to roll this. Again, doing exactly the same as we did before we put it through the extruder, making sure they're all nicely together, all roughly the same height. You can roll it quite long and thin at this stage if you want, and it's up to you how you then reduce this. I actually quite like reducing this in a square shape, and I will reduce it till it's nice, long and thin. You can of course reduce it in a roll until it's quite a thin size and shape. So I think I like square because it's just then easier to get into a triangle later. So all I'm going to do is literally press down with my fingers, creating a flat edge the whole way along. Turn over and repeat. Now this is going to get longer than the camera is going to be able to view, so I'll just keep going off the edges, but you get the idea. And this one is easier to do if your clays are slightly harder, rather than trying to push it through the extruder, which can be hard work. So once you've got it to a size that you're quite happy with, we're just going to change this square shape into a triangle by simply pinching in along the very top. Once you've done that, go back to your measuring sheet, and this time we're going to do 1 inch lengths or 2.5 centimetres, and just chop it off to give you those lengths. And again, I've just stretched it slightly so I can get the lengths going. And as before, pick them up and either put them together in their pairs or in random places. Now you're not going to get quite proper square shapes at this point, but we'll go in and change them into proper squares in a minute. We'll just see what we've got first. So again, we've got one little bit left, and we've only got 11 of those where 12 would be good. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce another little bits of one of those leftover bits of the canes we'd cut off earlier. Reduce him down to roughly the same size, make him into a triangle, and then he'll sit with his partner. And all you're going to do now is you're just going to make them into a squarer shape all the way down. So I'm just pressing in where it's slightly oblong and then pressing along the sides to make it more of a square shape. They tend to go slightly longer when that happens, but just work your way slowly through. And then when you've got your pieces, as before, just put them together in squares. You probably won't get as strong a diagonal line through because obviously we've manipulated these by hand, but you will still get the pattern. As before, push them together to make sure they're nicely adhered to each other. And then when you chop down, wherever you chop, you will get a mirror image. So that's one done with the extruder, and that's one done by hand. So as I hope you can see, it's a very, very similar effect. It's slightly neater and more precise done with the extruder, but I quite like this one as well. So those are two ways of doing it and using up the leftover of your scraps. Now if you're fairly new to polymer clay and don't actually have any scraps or leftover ends of canes or anything like that, you can also do this technique from brand new clay. So what I've got here, I've got 3.5 grams or 1/8 of an ounce of each of these 8 colours. So I've got white, brilliant blue, calypso blue, sunflower, raspberry, lilac, apple green and royal violet. And what I've done is I've taken those amounts and then just conditioned them all. Then in their pairings, so in those colours and those colours, I'm just going to chop them into loads of pieces, completely random. Once you chop them up, push them back together into a ball. And as we did before, we're just going to roll them into a bit of a log. And repeat that for the other 3 pairings. And then as we did before, we're just going to chop these into pieces. So I'm not going to be particularly exact, but probably about 4 for each one. Try and sort of vary the sizes slightly if you can. And then we'll put them together in a random fashion. And then we're going to do this one through the extruder, and of course as before you don't have to do this through the extruder, you could do it by hand, but we'll do the extruder because it just gives that little bit of extra detail. And this should be just about the right amount of clay to go into most of the standard extruder sizes. So as before, pull back the handle, get your die ready and put it inside. So again, as before, wherever you chop down through, you are going to get a mirror image. And that was literally with just plain colours of clay. So there we go. There's the 3 different bits I've done. So that was the one with extruded with the ends of canes. That was done by hand with the ends of canes. And then that one's done extruded, but with just odd colours cut into small pieces. So a really nice technique to use for all your leftover bits, or just if you fancy chopping up some new bits of clay and seeing how the colours work. So what I'll do now, as I say, I will get some scrap clay and I will take thin slices and put them over the top of the scrap clay, and then I will show you how that looks. So I've just put some scrap clay through on a medium setting, so setting number 3 on my machine, where 0 is thick and 9 is thin, and then I'll simply take some thinnish slices of this and put it up onto this scrap clay. Now you know my normal rule is make your cane, which of course this is with a complex pattern, as square as possible before you cut your slices and put them together so that you avoid all this gapping. But I thought I'd do it like this just to show you that you can actually get it back even if you've got lots of gaps. So all I do is I use this cable needle and I just roll one side to the other until I join up where all those gaps are. Now there's various other ways of doing it. You can put a sheet of greaseproof paper on top. I find doing this really gives me much more control to just gently move those pieces over and turn the piece round so you're not working at an awkward angle. And just take your time until it's all very nicely joined together with no gaps in those middle bits. With it all joined, I could put some paper over the top and burnish it nice and smooth, but it's not that unsmooth, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my roller and just give it a roll. Just to make sure all those seams are nicely joined together, because what I'm about to do is it's quite nice and thick at the moment. I'm going to put it through the pasta machine to expand the pattern out. And obviously that's what you can do, so you can either leave it nice and small like this, or if you take off all the excess clay, and I'm just going to put it through the pasta machine a couple of times, once that way and once that way, just to expand it out to make more of this pattern. And I'll put it through on as thick a setting as I can to start with, so don't start with a low setting. So this is quite thick, so I'm going to start on my second thickest setting. So it's still quite nice and thick, so it's still a nice sheet of veneer, but you can really see the pattern start to come out. So to make ourselves a nice piece of jewellery out of our scrap clay technique, I've taken 3 slices of the one we did by hand, so the endo leftover canes, but the one we did by hand, and I've just put the 3 slices together, made sure they're nice and even, and I'm just going to chop down to give myself a nice straight line, trying to keep the pattern relatively even. Now I've got here some scrap black clay, and I've cut this, I'll put this through on the pasta machine, setting number 2, and this is roughly the same thickness as the slices that I've taken, so bear that in mind. Whatever size slice you do, do something similar. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to chop a flat line here, and I'm going to chop off a piece or a stripe that is wide enough to take these little diamante bits to sit in. So obviously do it whatever size you like, but I'm going to do it about that. And obviously if I was being sensible, let's put this on here first. Put it up against the line so you can make sure you've got a nice even cut. So he's going to sit up against our bit of pattern clay there in a nice straight line. And then I've done myself a very simple skinner blend, just using white and apple green because I thought it would complement these colours nicely. If you're unsure on how to do a skinner blend, I have got a video which takes you all the way through that, and I'll put the link in the details below. And all I'm going to do with this one is again just chop a straight edge and pop him up, put him that way up against our piece, and then again with a very clean roller just very gently roll down to make sure they're all nicely adhered in place. And then because I'm having so much fun using it at the moment, I'm going to carry on using this heart template that I've been using for a while. And the first thing I'm going to think about is which way up I'm going to have it when it hangs, whether I'm going to hang it from this end so it goes down sort of like that, or whether I'm holding it straight up so the hook will go in here, because wherever I want to put it, that line needs to be going straight down, unless you particularly want to put it at an angle, in which case put your piece at a deliberate angle. So in order to see what it looks like, I'm going to use the other side of the template, and I've marked which one it is that I'm using. And I can simply sit this over the top and it'll give me a really good idea of what the pattern will look like depending on where I place my piece. So it's going to hang, I reckon, about there. It's going to hang like that. So really, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to aim it so that the black line starts from this point here in the heart and it finishes on this point here. So now I know where I'm going. I can simply pop that one in, leave him in place, check that it's right, point there, point at the bottom, and now I can cut round. So at this point I'm going to transfer onto the tile I'm going to bake on. I'm going to decide where my first crystal is going to go, and because these are ones with the pointed backs, I'm just going to put a little dot on and sit him in, and I'm going to press down so that he's going to sit in there whilst it bakes. I'm going to do the second one, or the bottom one, about there, and if you're trying to put 3 in, it's always easier to put the top one in and then the bottom one, because it's easier to judge the mid distance between these two, so you know the other one's going to go there, rather than have the 2 in and try and judge where the bottom one's going to go, because it's difficult to judge how far or how much room the actual crystal takes up. So when you've got your 3 crystals in, you just decide whether you're happy to leave it like that or whether you want a little border. I am going to go for a border, so I'm going to peel this off and get back to my excess black clay. I'm not going to need very much, so I'm simply going to put it together like that, and any folds I've got should either be at the bottom or at the sides. So I'm going to put it back through the pasta machine that way on quite a thin setting. I'll try setting number 5 because that's quite nice and thin. So I've just chopped off a bit there to have a look, see whether I'm happy with that as the size going around, which I am. So all I need to do now is to check the height. So a little bit on there. My craft knife. I can now put that up onto something like this, and I now know it's about 3/4 of one of those squares is all the way around. So I'll check whether that's enough to go around. It might just fit. So with my ruler, and using the end of the blade, cut yourself a nice long piece. And with any luck, it'll be just the right height to pop round your piece. When you're happy with your piece, simply bake the whole thing in tin foil as normal to protect it should the oven spike during baking, and then bake. When it's finished baking, with my finger I'll just pop out these crystals. I'll then sand and polish the whole of the front and then glue these back in. Add a little finding in here, little hoop, and that will be our piece finished. And I'll bring you back when that's all done. So there we go, there's our finished piece. It's been sanded and polished. I've added a little hook in here so it can be made independent, popped those 3 crystals out and then glued them back in. And the sandpaper I used was the wet dry sandpaper, and I use 240 grit 600 grit, 1000, 1500 and 2000 grit. I drilled the hole using this very small drill bit and used one of these tiny eye pins. So that's just one way in which you can use this technique. Obviously there are loads of others, but just gives you one idea for a finished design. So here are the sheets with all the veneers, and the one I chose to use in this one was actually this design. So this was the hand reduced one, but done in the triangle form with the canes. But I think you'll agree they would all look nice in that sort of design. So I think that's it, that's the video finished. I hope you enjoyed that one. It's a really great way to use up all the scrap ends left over from any canes you've made, and I think it comes out with quite a nice design. It's amazing how much you can get the repetition even through quite a large veneer of slices of your cane. As always, thank you so much for watching. Particular thank you to those who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And I hope I'll see you next time. That's it for now. Bye.